So let's say that in the next decade, just 10% of that, and that's not assuming any sort of inflation or any growth in, in the money supply, just 10%, that's $780 billion of actual capital that could flow into Bitcoin-backed products. Bitcoin's what, a $2 trillion asset today? You add in almost 50% of that market cap in fresh capital. We're going to start challenging gold before we know it. We're going to challenge gold's market cap. So does Bitcoin have a 10x in it? I want your viewers to hear me that I'm extremely bullish. Bitcoin is going to 10x from here.
Are you all in on the chair? How many chairs are you sitting on right now?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to One Chair Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Tyler Rowe. He's an entrepreneur and the host of Treasury Orange. We had a great conversation where we talked about Strategy's latest preferred equity, STREAM or STRE, Strategy's Q3 earnings call, Strive's new preferred SATA, and much more. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Tyler.
Hi, Tyler. Welcome to One Chair Podcast. It's really great to have you on.
Thanks, Eve. It's great to be on your show. I'm a big fan.
Thank you. Likewise. All right. First of all, I want to understand a little bit your journey, how you got into Bitcoin, and also what led you to the path of the Bitcoin Treasuries.
Great question. Take a sip of coffee. It's a bit of a story. I think I was kind of like predisposed to get Bitcoin, but my journey to Bitcoin took a lot longer than you would expect for someone who should have been able to grok it from the get-go. I kind of came up politically in the United States and had my political awakening when Ron Paul ran for president in the United States. He ran as a Republican. He was a part of the Republican Party. He had been a congressperson for a number of years, and he's kind of a libertarian. So he was a guy who really kind of made the idea of ending the Federal Reserve, which is the U.S. central bank. So he made that kind of go mainstream, or at least an okay thing for conservatives or libertarian or small government types in the U.S. to kind of talk about and embrace. And he's a guy who, was a big proponent of the gold standard. Of course, before the rise of the Federal Reserve in 1914 in the United States, the United States didn't have a central bank previously. There were times in the United States history where they did, but they were basically purely on a gold standard. And the Federal Reserve, was something under Woodrow Wilson as president to basically fund the U.S.'s involvement in World War I. And that, along with the income tax in the United States, they said it was going to be a temporary measure. But as we know, with the way political processes go, the last thing a government ever does is have a temporary program, right? So that's kind of digging into the past, 100 years. And then, like I said, fast forward to, it was really the 2011-2012 campaign of Ron Paul for president, where I was like, oh, this guy makes sense. He wants to end the wars. He wants to drastically cut down the size of the federal government, and he wants to end the Federal Reserve. And when you really grok that, monetary policy in the United States and fiat currency is a big problem that funds a lot of these, I'd say, abhorrent programs by the U.S. government and other governments. That's when I was like really awakened to the idea that returning to a sound money standard could fix a lot of this, because it kind of hamstrings what Congresses, what presidents, what political leaders can do. So, like I said, that was kind of my coming to age politically in 2011, 2012, when Ron Paul was talking about sound money. Now, Bitcoin had already been around for a couple of years, being really online a lot of the time. It was something I had heard of. And even in those political circles, a lot of Ron Paul's fans and political supporters were talking about Bitcoin, but it was something I never really did a deep dive on. I'm like, okay, this is private money. This is this is like an example of private money, just like gold, just like in America's history, banks would issue private money that wasn't backed by the government, but you basically had to earn the trust of your depositors by having, a sound balance sheet. And I was like, okay, Bitcoin's private money, go Bitcoin, but didn't really even understand what it was. And then in 2013 is when I first kind of was getting into investing in stocks and equities, kind of had my first job where I was making some decent money. And I was like, hey, I should buy a little bit of Bitcoin. It was more in the news, and I heard like, some people around the office talking about it a little bit. And I was like, oh, Bitcoin's kind of going mainstream. And what I again, I still hadn't done a deep dive. I just kind of saw that it was a meme, right? And being online as I am, I was like, I need to buy some of this. And then I went up a couple 100% on the Bitcoin I had bought, and I sold it all. And I thought I was a genius, right? I thought I was an absolute genius for getting a, 2x, 3x return on my money. I'm like, oh, okay, good job. I'll move on to the next equities and worry about that, And then come to the 2017 phase. I was a banker at this point. I was a commercial lender for a bank. I had previously worked in retail mortgages, but I had a small book of a couple $100 million, and I had a client of mine come in who was in his mid 70s. And he sat down at my desk. I had financed some properties for him. And he said, hey, what about this Bitcoin thing? Should I be buying some Bitcoin? And again, I didn't own any Bitcoin at this point. I had just traded it and kind of, I wouldn't say forgot about it, but just really hadn't paid much attention to it over the last 3 or 4 years. It's a classic story, right? And but again, all I got in that moment was like, oh my goodness, we're entering another Bitcoin bubble. And I wasn't really price sensitive, but I knew that, this 75-year-old guy was in my office asking about buying Bitcoin. I was like, I don't know if that's the right risk profile for you. I'm like, I can't really give you financial advice, but that's something you're going to have to talk to your financial advisor about. And then what did I do? Within a week, I went in and bought some more Bitcoin. I think it's probably trading around $1,000 at this point. And again, I just bought it for the meme. I bought, a decent amount of Bitcoin that I wish I had now. And then the price was rocketing at the beginning of the summer. And I was buying and selling it on Coinbase, not worrying about the tax consequences, but I had a hefty tax bill the next year as I sold it. And again, I sold most of my stack Eve at about probably, after churning it over it several times, probably $2,000 to $2,500 a coin. And then, as we know, in December of 2017, it cranked up to $20,000 a coin. I didn't really, again, I still hadn't done the deep dive into Bitcoin. I had no regrets. I bought a car, I bought with cash, I bought, I had a bunch of extra cash, and I reinvested in some other equities that I was interested in, and I kind of moved on again. And then finally in 2020, Michael Saylor comes onto the scene, and I was still screwing around with not understanding Bitcoin, but I finally kind of found some Bitcoin podcasts, specifically What Bitcoin Did with Peter McCormack. And, he just had an amazing podcast, and that podcast is living on with Danny. And it's a great podcast. If any of you guys haven't listened to it, you need to, because they just have some unbelievable guests who talk about, all about Bitcoin. And that's, COVID happened. Everyone was kind of staying at home. Lockdowns were happening. And I saw an opportunity to start a business. I was working my day job for 40 hours a week and working my business for another 40 hours a week, and just was grinding away. And also, because of the nature of my business, I was in the car a lot. So I had all the Bitcoin podcasts on. I was listening to Michael Saylor and seeing what Strategy was doing, turning into a Bitcoin Treasury company. And I finally put in the requisite, even 20 hours into studying Bitcoin. I don't even think it takes hundreds of hours to at least initially grok Bitcoin. If you can put in a good 10, 20 hours and really understand it. I had this moment where I was like, oh, I was kind of propagandized. I still kind of understood gold as hard money and had a little investment in that. I listened to, influencers like Peter Schiff, who, ideologically was aligned with me and was shilling gold, of course, and gold, mining stocks and all that. So I was like, oh, Bitcoin is this digital transformation of gold for a new century, for a new generation, where it is a return to that hard money standard, whether governments want to return to it or not, because it's a finitely scarce money that can be transferred digitally. So it just improved upon all the aspects of gold. And once I finally made that click in my head from listening to others talk about it, Michael Saylor and others, that's when I was like, okay, I need to accumulate as much of this asset as possible, and I'm never selling it again. Never say never, certainly. You got to live your life. I view Bitcoin at that point through 2020, 2021 really turned into kind of my savings vehicle. It took some money from what I was investing in equities. It took money from what I was investing maybe in money markets, looking for the next opportunity and just having cash sit on the sidelines. Why wouldn't I put it into something that's going to just compound forever, more and more against fiat currency? So this is a long kind of little story about how I got there, but I think it's crucial to talk about how we found Bitcoin. And in my story may have a lot of similarities with some people, but sometimes it takes many times of buying and selling Bitcoin before you really can grok it. And I think that's indicative of where we're at now. I think a lot of finance types, a lot of people maybe in the pension space, financial advisors are starting to understand Bitcoin, and it's been de-risked for them, but they're not going to finally grok it until maybe another Bitcoin cycle or two. So first and foremost, I'm a Bitcoin hodler. Like I said, classically, never sell your Bitcoin. Because I kind of grew up with Michael Saylor also teaching me about Bitcoin, I think I'm always going to be someone who's looking for equities, because I think these Bitcoin Treasury companies can offer a higher volatility profile on Bitcoin than Bitcoin itself. And I'm willing to take a little bit of counterparty risk and earn some potential more upside on Bitcoin by getting some more exposure to Bitcoin equities. So I love what Strategy is doing with these Bitcoin-backed credit products. And that's kind of my story, Eve.
Great. I love hearing those stories, to be honest. That's why I always ask this question, even to anybody that gets into Bitcoin, right? Because everybody comes from a different angle, always surprising. And yeah, I met a lot of people, they always tell me, oh yeah, I wish I could go back in time in 2015 and buy Bitcoin and all of that. And I tell them, look, in 2015, you would have lost your Bitcoin. There's no way in hell you would have held it. You would have lost it because the custody solution wouldn't have been great. You wouldn't have understood it, so you would have sold it too early. So if you have it now, just hold it now. But in 2015, there is no way in hell that you would have held it till today.
My one regret is that maybe I would have gotten some Mt. Gox Bitcoin and been forced to hodl it for, when they went bankrupt and be able to claim it. But I probably would have sold my stake. It's a rare person that was able to hodl and be an OG for all that time, to really grok Bitcoin back in 2012, 13, 14, 15, it takes a special person who has a lot of vision and, really a lot of luck, right? Because Bitcoin, we call it a risk asset maybe still today, but Bitcoin was not de-risked at all back then. And so to be able to hold a significant portion of your wealth in that, I think takes a lot of luck, takes a lot of foresight and a lot of stones.
Absolutely, completely agree. And coming to the equities part as well that you mentioned, I think that and now I understand why you were able to understand the treasury companies, right? Due to your background as a banker, or just generally, because I talk to a lot of people who are in the tech industry or who are in the crypto industry, but they always come with this, especially the people coming again from the tech side of it. They really don't understand the Bitcoin treasuries, and I think understanding credits as you did and from your background, I think makes sense now.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like if I think there's a lot of Bitcoiners who maybe haven't even just understood equities because they've just bought and held Bitcoin, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that, certainly. But just going through my learning curve of investing in equities itself too, and aside from my banking background, I think just understanding how those work and what the value proposition is something that really was, it made Bitcoin treasury companies make sense very easily for me.
Yeah, and exactly. So you've hosted a number of really fascinating people on your show, and you're on fire with that. And you also had people that were against the Bitcoin treasury. So you've had people on both sides of the spectrum. Have any of them, so the people who are more skeptical, have any of them made any compelling arguments against, or something that struck with you?
Yeah, like you said, I've had a lot of really smart, incredible Bitcoiners on the show who are bearish maybe on the Bitcoin Treasury phenomenon. And I found interviewing them, Eve, I didn't have a lot to disagree with them on. Did they make compelling points that would make me not want to invest in Bitcoin Treasuries or cover Bitcoin Treasuries? No, because we are still early in the Bitcoin Treasury space. I think they do raise compelling points. That one of the most compelling things they said is that really does every jurisdiction need a Bitcoin Treasury company? And I think I agree with a lot of them that no, they don't. We can get into the reasons why, and that maybe in a minute here. But to me, that's something that I think I agree with them on. Um, but at the end of the day, I think what a lot of the people who are Bitcoiners but don't get the Bitcoin Treasury companies um, just haven't done the time on is that they don't want that third party risk. They don't want the risk of a equity. And that is a trade-off you have when you have a self-sovereign asset like Bitcoin that you can store in self-custody, or you can have in collaborative custody, a multi-signature setup, and you can actually just hold the bearer asset. Introducing risk of a third party where government maybe has more purview over how a Bitcoin Treasury company operates, or a Bitcoin Treasury company can make financial mistakes. They have key man risk. Michael Saylor could die. He's got a great team behind him, but those are real concerns, and they're not compelling enough to make me not want to invest in Bitcoin Treasury companies, because I think I'm putting in the due diligence and the work to only invest in companies that I understand, and companies that I think can repeat their performance over time. But I would say, I think it's fair to be a little bearish on those companies, and to maybe not have the risk appetite for amplified Bitcoin returns, because that's what it is. You are taking leverage on your Bitcoin, and a lot of those guys I've had on, I think of maybe, Checkmate and Matt Mazinskis, like they've been around Bitcoin for a while, and they have seen a lot of leveraged plays on Bitcoin, whether it's yield generating products or Bitcoin lenders. They've seen a lot of those guys implode over the years, and they've just held their Bitcoin and seen it from afar and said, a lot of people got wrecked. Maybe I don't want to get wrecked on this until it's been de-risked. And I do think that's something that's going to happen over the coming years. We're going to see these Bitcoin treasuries become de-risked, and maybe the gains won't be as high as they are today. But I think a lot more people are going to be turned on to that Bitcoin Treasury trade, I guess you would say.
Yeah, no. And I think, people just need to understand that once they go into the Bitcoin Treasury company space, they go down the risk curve, right? So that's the most important fact to understand. The least risky asset that you can hold is Bitcoin, and everything else goes down the tail. So,
That's right.
so for sure. And you mentioned, exactly, that you're doing your due diligence. Can you let us know a little bit which Bitcoin treasuries you're looking at specifically, and what factors are you looking into them when you do your due diligence?
Yeah, absolutely. Not financial advice, just to
Absolutely.
clarify. At Treasury Orange, we're trying to educate people the best we can, and we're working through as many of these Bitcoin treasuries as we can. And I really want to cover the largest market capitalization companies. I'm also interested in these companies that have a small Bitcoin treasury, and maybe they're not offering these Bitcoin-backed credit products. So I think of Figma, who IPO'd this summer. That's a company that has $100 million or so in Bitcoin on their balance sheet. I think of Block, formerly Square. That's Jack Dorsey's company, who owns some Bitcoin. Even Coinbase has some Bitcoin. The Bitcoin miners have Bitcoin, and Tesla. That's even a company that we're going to cover. And why do they have a Bitcoin treasury, and how does that just add a little bit of floor to their balance sheet. So I think those are interesting companies first and foremost. But then, of course, in the pure play Bitcoin treasury space, of course, you've got Strategy, MSTR. They're the king, and they have such a head start on how much Bitcoin they have that I think they've significantly de-risked themselves. So that's I think, first and foremost, one of the big things I'm looking for in a company is that they have enough Bitcoin on the balance sheet to have de-risked themselves, and they're able to generate a consistent Bitcoin yield. And when I say consistent, I don't mean, every quarter it's going to be a similar amount, but they're going to consistently generate a positive Bitcoin yield. So that's, strategy has been able to say, hey, we can consistently improve upon the Bitcoin per share that we've got. And to see, how many, what do they have? 650,000 Bitcoin practically on their balance sheet, strategy. They've been able to build a whole host of products around that Bitcoin. And when you think of their Strife and Stretch and now their Stream product, those are really well collateralized by the Bitcoin on their balance sheet. They've been able to raise billions of dollars with those products. And those three products in particular are so low risk because Saylor said it recently on his Q3 earnings call for strategy that Strike was 5x over collateralized by their Bitcoin. I'd have to double check on that. But, that basically implies that if Bitcoin had an 80% drawdown, Strike is still completely one-to-one covered by the Bitcoin because of where it sits in the capital stack. So it's been interesting to see companies like Strategy draw down their pure leverage. I think that these preferred equity products still are leverage. I know Saylor has been calling them amplification, but that may be just a legal distinction. But that it's been interesting to see them draw down the bonds, convertible bonds and such that they have at the top of their risk structure. I think them moving away from those is a really good long-term play. It has hurt their stock price in the short term, but that's something I'm looking for in a treasury company. So who can emulate the strategy playbook and kind of build upon that? So one of the companies we've talked a lot about on Treasury Orange is Strive. Strive just came out with their first perpetual preferred product, or announced it, and they're going to be raising money over the next week for that. And we can talk more about that product, SATA. I've heard some people call it SATA. I don't know. We'll settle on something soon, I guess, once we hear them talk about it. I'm really excited about the leadership team over at Strive. So that's a company that really, I think, is going to do it right just because of their background. Their CEO has Matt Cole. He has a background in the fixed income space where he managed a fixed income portfolio for a large pension in the United States. They've got Ben Workman and Jeff Walton, who just have built a great community around talking about strategy online. So I think they're going to be able to tap that. They really understand how these Bitcoin Treasury pure play equities can work, and I think they're going to try to build upon that. Now, a company like that, they're not as de-risked. They just reverse merged to go public with this private company just a few months ago. So I think they've got a long way to go in proving that they belong. But what am I looking for in a Bitcoin Treasury company? I'm looking for a really strong management team beyond their execution, right? So I think that's really important in these companies that like Strive. I think of 21, Jack Mallers' company. They're backed by SoftBank and backed by Tether, who I think are two companies that are extremely well run and understand finance, both in the digital and the traditional finance space. So that's a company I'm excited about. They've accumulated a lot of Bitcoin before they completed their SPAC merger, so they haven't really executed on the Bitcoin strategy of offering credit products or any type of upside on their Bitcoin, but they've privately raised a lot of money to kind of get that flywheel started. So because they have a good management team, because they've got solid Bitcoiners behind them, I'm pretty excited about the things that they'll be able to do once the merger is really completed and they can start that flywheel. But that, like we saw with strategy, all of these Bitcoin Treasury companies, they're going to take some time to really build up that credit structure that's backed by Bitcoin. So strategy in the early days, I think, was kind of more a meme, or at least a highly risky play at first to invest in strategy. And then as they were able to deliver on their promises and accumulate a massive amount of Bitcoin, I think, especially this time last year, seeing how much capital strategy was able to raise in just a short term, because we kind of had this event in the United States where the SEC under the Biden administration had approved ETFs. So we kind of saw a softening stance towards Bitcoin from the Democratic side of things. And then on the Republican side of things, you saw Donald Trump win the election for president here in the United States. And that was a further signal that Bitcoin was going to be de-risked from a regulatory standpoint. So Strategy capitalized on that. Their stock price was ripping, Bitcoin's price was ripping, and they just tapped the equity and debt markets massively to add more capital to the balance sheet, which is what I want to see these companies do, right? When you have the opportunity to dilute your stock to add more Bitcoin accretively or to offer more Bitcoin credit, that's what I want to see your company do. So those are a few of the names that I've been looking at. I've really dived deep into those companies and anxious to dive into more of these Bitcoin Treasury companies as we go.
Yeah, no, I see you made a proper due diligence on Strategy and Strive, which are more American based. And just maybe out of curiosity, is there anything outside of the US that you had a look at in more detail? I know you had a nice deep dive on your show on Treasury Orange about Metaplanet, but I don't know about maybe Capital B or on another one.
Yeah, I to be honest, I haven't looked extremely deeply into Capital B yet, so that's kind of the gap there. Metaplanet, obviously, I'm very bullish on. I think the Japanese market is, because I think Japan uniquely has extremely low yields on their Japanese denominated products. So they've had basically negative real interest rates for decades, right, Eve? So to see a company capitalize on Bitcoin that went from, it was basically a shell company, even more so than Strategy or maybe even some of these companies that are turning into so-called pure play companies. I think Metaplanet really was a shell company with their small, microscopic hotel business. So to see them really capitalize in that market, I think is huge for the Japanese market, and I love what they're doing. Obviously their MNAV has compressed massively, and I think that's an overcorrection because I think their MNAV rose to such heights that were unrealistic for a Bitcoin Treasury company. But I think we're always going to see that, especially as more people understand these equities, is you're going to see a MNAV surge and then crash. And, sentiment's been low across the Bitcoin Treasury space. But I think there's been so many treasury companies to follow that retail investors have been spreading their money, maybe diluting their shares, their holdings in Strategy and investing in smaller companies like Metaplanet, in 21, Bullish, Riot, other Bitcoin Treasury companies. So yeah, I am really bullish on Metaplanet. I think there's also like a meme-like quality to a Japanese equity that doesn't maybe exist in other markets. I think it's a cultural thing with, maybe I'm wrong there, but the Japanese market just kind of natively more just understands crypto more largely in Bitcoin. And because it's harder to buy Bitcoin in Japan, or harder to basically have preferential tax treatment as you'd see in other jurisdictions like the US or Canada, I think being able to access an equity in Japan is just something that is going to have some staying power. Now, maybe Metaplanet gets some competition with more companies popping up in Japan, or maybe Strategy is able to offer, a yield product in Japan. We saw them just this week, just yesterday. Time flies in Bitcoin Treasury space, but we saw them offer a product that's going to be euro denominated, that's listed on, I think, the Luxembourg stock exchange. So yeah, if Strategy or someone moves into Japan, maybe that does take away a little bit of market share from Metaplanet. So you are going to see some of these treasury companies compete, and that can have, a dilutive effect on these Bitcoin treasury companies. But if Bitcoin does what we think it's going to do and appreciates at 50% year over year for the next 5 or 10 years, maybe a little less, maybe more, there's going to be a strong demand for these companies throughout the globe. Like I said, I don't think that every market needs one of these, especially if a company that's been so de-risked like Strategy can offer credit products in these markets. Like I'm curious about your perspective, Eve. How easy is it for Europeans to buy Strategy and their products?
I think in general here in Switzerland at least, it's quite easy, and I think in Europe as well. So, and actually that's the reason why I was asking this question, because exactly now we see Strategy entering in the other markets, as you mentioned, now the European market. And that's why specifically I asked Capital B, because they're euro denominated, right? So right now, Strategy is the biggest competitor to Capital B. And yeah, obviously, I think you can both agree that the market is still at its infancy. So there's probably enough room for both of them. But although it's the beginning, you can already see Strategy, as Saylor put it in his in the Q3 earnings, he wants to eat the world. So again, coming back to your statements, where probably you don't need a Bitcoin Treasury in every jurisdiction, completely makes sense, especially after this Q3 earnings call and now the euro-denominated STRE stream from Strategy. But yeah, I don't know if you have any further thoughts on this one.
Yeah, it's funny, like it was amazing to me how forthcoming Michael Saylor has been about spreading the Bitcoin Treasury playbook. I guess it's out in the open, but he almost encouraged competition, right? And I think he is the reason a lot of these, at least the US based companies, and I think globally, he's a reason these pure play companies have started accumulating Bitcoin. I don't think they just saw what he was doing. I think him saying, go out and do this really sparked a lot of Bitcoiners to say, hey, yeah, we really can start a Bitcoin Treasury company in our jurisdiction. So I think he light speeded adoption, but I thought it was interesting. Like, what are you doing, Michael, by encouraging more competition? Isn't that going to be dilutive? And I think it has been. However, because Strategy has this really long-term outlook and wants to kind of eat the world, like you said, become this monster of a company, as Saylor famously said at the end of the earnings call recently. I think he's really confident that Strategy is going to be able to execute and deliver to all these markets across the world and reduce friction on how easily people can invest in Bitcoin products, and strip away some of that volatility for people all over the world. He made another salient point recently where he said, basically Bitcoin may take 10, 20, 30 hours plus to wrap someone's mind around it. And Michael Saylor doesn't have 30 hours to spend with someone who's just watching financial news like Bloomberg or CNBC here in the United States. But he can make a 30-second, a 60-second elevator pitch on why you should buy Stretch, STRC, and move your money from money markets that are earning maybe 4%, 3% in Europe to a product that's yielding 8, 9, 10, 12% maybe in your jurisdiction. That's a lot easier thing to grasp, because then all you have to do is have confidence in MicroStrategy, in Strategy, that they're going to be a company that is well capitalized and they're not going bankrupt, right, to buy their product. So you're going to put if you're someone who hasn't understood, you're a pre-coiner, you don't understand Bitcoin yet, you're much more likely to invest in a company like Strategy. So
I think that completely makes sense. And yeah, we've touched already a little bit on Strategy's Q3 earnings, basically on Michael Saylor's speech, or at least his final answer to Ben. And was there any other part of the Q3 earnings that you thought was a highlight, or were there other highlights in general?
There were many highlights, Eve. I get out the popcorn. My wife teases me when it's when we have a quarterly earnings call for Strategy. It's can't miss TV for me. I'm always I'm constantly, when I watch it, I try to watch it through straight, and then I want to rewatch it. I want to rewind and chew on some of these nuggets that Fong and Michael Saylor kind of released to the public. I love that they've added the Q&A session with some Bitcoiners and Bitcoin Treasury folks. That's been really cool to see. So talking specifically about, this recent earnings call, one thing that Saylor said that was really interesting, and it's just reinforcing kind of his business model. And he said it before, but he just said it really succinctly, and I hope I can do it justice and not murder it. But he said that Strategy is in the business of creating digital equity by harnessing digital capital, that's Bitcoin, and creating digital credit products. So I want to say that again. strategy and these treasury companies are creating digital equity by harnessing digital capital and creating digital credit products. And that's the big thing that Michael and Fong are doing. They're salesmen now. They're engineers who are creating these awesome Bitcoin-backed products, but they're also out there trying to sell these products, and they're talking a lot more about strategy and these derivative products that they've been able to IPO, and that is something that I think is just a huge unlock. I think this next wave of people who are going to get into Bitcoin may not understand it at the level that we as Bitcoiners might like, where they see it as a self-sovereign asset. Of course, it is a self-sovereign asset, and I think that's important to talk about. But I think a lot of these people may not have the time or the bandwidth to understand Bitcoin, the asset, but they do have the time and bandwidth because they're managing other people's funds to bring them into these digital credit products that are backed by Bitcoin. And I think, something I'm really hopeful about is that as more and more people rotate capital into these, digital products that are backed by Bitcoin, I think that's going to unlock time and space for those people to understand Bitcoin better, right? So as you have financial advisors who can now offer these products or will be able to offer these products to their clients over the next 5 years, they're going to understand Bitcoin better. It's not just going to be Bitcoiners who are going to be moving their clients into Bitcoin, but these people are going to understand, what is strategy doing? And can I do that for my personal balance sheet? Can I buy Bitcoin? What is Bitcoin? How do I hold it in self-custody? And that it's going to take more time, and it may not happen in the way a lot of Bitcoiners might like, but I love this attack vector that Saylor and other, equity influencers are able to market this to people who are pre-coiners, as we say, people who haven't grokked Bitcoin yet. If Michael Saylor was talking about these products and had offered these products back in 2013, I probably would have understood Bitcoin a lot sooner. I think of my own situation, and I think a lot more people are going to understand it. So another thing that I was thinking about a lot during the earnings call that Saylor had was that why MSTR, right? Like I stepped back and said, why are we into these Bitcoin treasury companies? Why is MSTR such a good investment? I try to constantly reevaluate that. And again, Saylor says it every single quarter. You're basically getting higher volatility on Bitcoin. And if you're someone who can tolerate that risk by buying the common equity of strategy, you're just getting Bitcoin with leverage, with amplification, with these credit products that can just add more Bitcoin to the balance sheet. So you've still got that same asset underlying the whole thing. That's what equity is, right? You're giving up some risk, and you're trusting in a third party who's being able to execute on their strategy. So that's why I want to own some Bitcoin equities, so that I can basically, leverage my Bitcoin in a way that's safe and by people who can tap debt markets that I can't, access on a personal level. I've got some more thoughts about the call, but I want to hear your response to that, Eve.
Yeah, no, I just want to come to two things you mentioned. First of all, I like the fact that you're getting popcorn and get all excited about Q3 earnings. And I also saw you tweet once about MSTR True North, how you watch it with your wife, I believe. That's great because that makes me feel more normal. I think besides you and Quentin, I don't know anybody else that gets excited about these things. So that's nice to see there's others like us. And the second thing, and that one is the one that struck with me the most because, as you mentioned, right, the thanks to the strategy and the Bitcoin treasuries, a lot of the normies will get exposure to Bitcoin, right? And here, before, when I started my journey into Bitcoin, I was thinking, oh wow, if Bitcoin is really going to eat the world, there's going to be a divide between the population, right? There's going to be the ones who have and the ones who don't have anything because they wouldn't have invested into Bitcoin if really it happens, right? And once I understood what the Bitcoin treasuries, mainly strategy, what they were doing and how through, for example, getting in the indexes like QQQ and S&P 500 potentially in the future, pension funds would get access to Bitcoin exposure and things like this, I realized that we would have a sort of a smooth or a smoother transition if it really would happen, right? And that's where I think a lot of Bitcoiners that don't understand the play feel maybe like, oh yeah, it's all speculation, it's all about into getting more Bitcoin and things like this for these types of people. But I also see the flip side, that there's going to be exposure for these types of people, and you mentioned it as well, right? So it's a nice way to see that there's going to be a smoother transition. So
Yeah. No, I think that was a point I think a few of my guests had, is that, yeah, are you really just trying to get more Bitcoin? It seems kind of like an ICO craze where you're buying altcoins to sell, just speculate on and acquire more Bitcoin. And you know what? Yeah, me buying MSTR, is me trying to acquire more Bitcoin, or more Bitcoin per share, in this case, or get more increased exposure to Bitcoin. But you're right, Eve. I think you put it really well in saying that, these products are bringing Bitcoin to the masses, right? Because they're being included in the NASDAQ 100, because they're probably going to be included in the S&P 500. Everybody's retirement, at least in the United States, everybody has quite a bit of exposure to these indexes, right? I think the S&P 500 has, I want to say, like $30 trillion in in assets under management of people who are exposed to that. So, yeah, just Strategy coming in there, Coinbase coming in there, other companies who have Bitcoin on the balance sheet. Just, you're right, it smooths out the transition to a more Bitcoinized world. And, I don't know what hyper Bitcoinization is going to look like. I don't know how Bitcoinized we're going to be over the next 10 to 20 years. I think fiat currencies do have a lot of runway potentially, despite how I would like things to play out. But yeah, the smoothing of Bitcoin being adopted through pensions, through retirement funds, through money market funds that people have, I think that's a good thing, right? We want Bitcoin to be well distributed all throughout society. We don't want haves and have-nots. There's always going to be some mismatch of equality in net worth, or how much capital people have, and I'm comfortable with that being the case. But I think everyone's going to get some Bitcoin exposure. Pay me in Bitcoin, right?
So that's what I'm most excited about, to be honest, because I know so many people, you talk to them about Bitcoin, and they still refuse, or they don't want to learn about it, and we all can see it coming, right? Once you see it, you can't unsee. So absolutely excited about that.
I get really excited about it, and it's so hard. It's so hard to talk to your family sometimes about Bitcoin. I think of my parents, like, just selling them. They get it more and more every time I talk to them. But I think a product like STRC is just so much easier for them to grok than Bitcoin, despite how how well I work on my elevator pitch. Michael Saylor is just going to be able to create this product that gives them Bitcoin exposure a lot better than I can do it,
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, and the world is moving really quickly, and even faster on the Bitcoin Treasuries. So we've seen MSTR getting the S&P rating now, B-, which we haven't touched on. Obviously, now we touched on the STRE, the euro-denominated new preferred equity. And have you had any thoughts on how quickly all of these news are coming right now? At least in summer, things have been accelerating.
Yeah, it's crazy, Eve. I love it. Yeah, more news about Bitcoin, the better, right? And I love, move fast and break things. So the S&P rating, I think, was really cool to see. Obviously, I think we're all maybe a little disappointed to see maybe a B- rating from the jump on Strategy as a company. I don't think the S&P rating agency is really giving Bitcoin as collateral the credit it deserves. And I think it's just going to take time. It's probably going to be 5+ years before we see them really grok Bitcoin. And something I always say on my podcast is that I don't know the order of operations. I don't know how these things are going to play out. Is it going to be led by more people buying, just self-custody Bitcoin? Is it going to be more people buying Stretch and rotating money from money market funds into Stretch that's going to make, more of Wall Street understand how Bitcoin works and how Bitcoin is collateralized, or is it going to be led by the S&P 500, including strategy that unlocks, Morgan Stanley and Fidelity to allow their brokers to sell more of these Bitcoin-backed products? I don't know which way it's going to come, and Bitcoin always surprises you, right? So to see the B- rating, I think at least seeing a rating on strategy and them seeking that out is just a net positive, no matter what the rating was going to be, right? So that allows more people who can't touch unrated equities to invest in strategy and their products. So even though it's a B- rating, I know we think strategy should be rated A or AA or AAA, probably better. If the U.S. government's rated AA, I think strategy should be rated AAA or at least AA and above. But that's a personal preference. I might be a little biased. This does unlock more people saying, "Hey, this is another kind of notch in the belt of how Bitcoin is eating capital markets, how Bitcoin is being accepted by Wall Street, by equity markets, by credit markets. Just like the ETFs were a major step, just like strategy becoming a Bitcoin Treasury was a major step, just like GBTC becoming a fund that held Bitcoin back in 2017 was a major step. All these steps kind of have been a long time coming, and they're all good for Bitcoin. As you mentioned, the STREAM product, STRE, which is the euro-denominated credit product that we just heard about from strategy, just is another way that Europe is able to, if you're someone who gets Bitcoin or gets this product or who will get this product, it's just been legitimized more for the European market, right? So I hope strategy getting this product will make regulators more favorable to Bitcoin and Bitcoin Treasury companies, and investors certainly are going to, have another vehicle that is just more legitimized. I think we'll probably see more ETF products in Europe, coming in the coming years, and this is all good for Bitcoin. I'm bullish. I think the biggest risk to Bitcoin and Bitcoin Treasury companies is still a regulatory risk, and the quicker companies like strategy, like Metaplanet, can speed run getting these products to market, I think it just takes that risk away, or dampens that risk, the political risk.
I mean, once the genie's out of the bottle, it's going to be harder to put it back in, right? So yeah, that's definitely something. And I'm really excited to see how fast strategy and now Strive as well are coming with these products. I was expecting Metaplanet to come before Strive. So that was a nice surprise. And talking about Strive, so maybe we can deep dive a bit about the SATA product, because it's so for the viewers, it's basically an STRC like product. It's dividend yielding 12% per year. It's got the same notional of $100, and it's paid monthly, as mentioned. And I'm super excited to see now a competitor to STRC, and I don't know how you see it as well, Tyler.
Yeah, I'm just digging into this, so if I say something wrong, please correct me, Eve. But yeah, to see a competitor to stretch, I think is really cool to see. I think Strive is targeting raising about $125 million or so in the initial, IPO of this product. So that's really cool to see. And this is, Strive is a company that doesn't have any leverage essentially on their balance sheet. They do have those warrants that are outstanding, and that's something I'm really excited to talk to Strive's team about, to see how they view those warrants, putting pressure on the stock, but also how can it increase their Bitcoin. But to see SATA start with a 12% dividend, I think is a smart move. I think to raise another $100 million plus of Bitcoin to add to the balance sheet is that's a sizable chunk for a company like Strive that only has about 6,000 Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Of course, they've got the pending merger with Semler Scientific. We can talk about that in a bit, but that'll add some more Bitcoin to their balance sheet if it's completed. To see them go out straight away, they're delivering on what they said they'll do. So I'm excited to see this product. One thing I really like about this product, Eve, like you said, it's got a $100 par value that'll be paid monthly. And one thing I like about this compared to Stretch is that they are targeting a $95 to a $105 price of where, they're going to try to keep it within that 10% band, essentially. That's a little bit higher than what Strategy is targeting, but I think it gives Strive a little bit more freedom to let the price run on that if there is some demand in their product, where they can really take advantage if the price is running above that par value, maybe rather than reducing by 1/4% that 12% dividend, maybe they can ATM the SATA offering and just drive the price down that way. I think I think with Strategy, they're a little bit maybe they've hamstrung themselves by targeting a smaller window, and maybe they'll change that as time goes by, but time will tell how that works. I think that bigger band that Strive's allowing themselves will allow them to use the ATM more aggressively on SATA. Do they have a name for that yet, Eve? Have they called it something other than SATA?
I think SATA was how at least Ben Berkman pronounced it during the presentation,
Okay.
if I recall well. So yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's
so
the name.
there's a lot of tickers that we're going to have to keep track of. So in the Bitcoin Treasury space, we've got a lot to keep up with certainly. But yeah, I'm excited about this product. I'm excited to see if it's going to be listed on retail brokerages like Robinhood right away, because we saw the Strategy products get onto Robinhood, and I think obviously retail isn't as sizable of a component necessarily as some institutional funds or large scale brokerages, but I think on a democratized platform like Robinhood, you're going to see a lot of interest in these products because, especially as rates have been starting to creep down with the Federal Reserve targeting lower short-term interest rates. I think a lot of people who keep cash on a brokerage platform are going to be looking for a way to earn extra yield. And man, earning 12% yield, I don't know what price this is going to IPO at, but you might be earning 13, 14% yield if you get in early on SATA, if it trades below that par value. So wow, if I could sweep some cash into that, even as someone who is bullish on Bitcoin, it's hard to say no to a 12% return on my cash that I'm maybe thinking about where to place that money. Heck, it pays the dividend monthly. If you really believe in the strength of these Bitcoin Treasury companies, and you're saving up for a house, you have even like a 2, 3, 4-year time window. You're saving a down payment to purchase a property or some other, maybe you're saving up for a car or something like that. Like, wow, why not throw your cash that's sitting on the sidelines into these products? Because I think with the way they're able to keep that price around the par value, knock on wood, that's a huge thing to have something that's earning way more than a money market fund. So if I can actually see real returns on capital that I'm saving for a large capital expenditure as a retail investor, that's just huge. And I think it's a game changer. Eve, I had a call this morning with one of my Bitcoiner friends who, I won't dox him, but he works for a major financial advisory firm here in the United States, one of the top 10. And he was talking to me about how he's got, a portfolio of, I think, $120 million in assets under management. And he's got some 25% of his assets under management are in either money market funds or just short duration CDs. And I said to him, even if, and he can't sell these products, right? So his firm doesn't allow, his broker dealer doesn't allow him to invest in these Bitcoin backed products yet. But we know that's inevitable, that this is going to change. And I hope it's in the next year, I hope it's in the coming years, and we don't have to wait 5, 6, 7, 8 years for this. But if he could rotate just half of that capital that's sitting in money markets into an 8 or 10% yielding product, imagine how happy his customers are going to be. And that's going to help him too, because his profit sharing in his assets under management is going to grow. And imagine once these guys start talking to each other, and imagine if Fidelity allows investment into these products and they talk to their broker friends at a conference or broker friends that they rub shoulders with at Morgan Stanley, hey, I can offer these Bitcoin-backed credit products to my customers that are just way better than a money market fund. Like, it's just going to explode. You're going to see everybody want to offer these products, and if their broker's not going to do it, that's going to put real pressure on you to remain competitive. So, and this friend of mine, I was like, yeah, if you can allocate just $12 million of those assets under management that you've got, multiply that by just 1,000 other investment advisors. Let's go super, bearish on how many people are going to allocate to this. Just multiply that by 1,000. That's $12 billion, Eve, that's rotating from money markets of retail type, retirement focused people. And that's $12 billion that's going to rotate into these products. And that's just going to be buying Bitcoin. So say that money goes into an MSTR product. Michael Saylor is going to take $12 billion just from 1,000 investment advisors who want to sell this product. Okay, let's multiply that by 10. Let's still be kind of bearish. That's $120 billion of fresh capital, and not just, what's Strategy's market cap, like 70, 80 billion dollars. We're talking about $120 billion of fresh capital rotating into Strategy's products and Bitcoin. What do you think that's going to do to Bitcoin's price, right? I mean, that's like an entire IBIT market cap, like that type of money can come in. And I think that's just bearish. There's 7.8 trillion with a T, $7.8 trillion, I think, today in money market accounts in the United States. So let's say that in the next decade, just 10% of that, and that's not assuming any sort of inflation or any growth in the money supply, just 10%, that's $780 billion of actual capital that could flow into Bitcoin-backed products. Bitcoin's what, a $2 trillion asset today? You add in almost 50% of that market cap in fresh capital. We're going to start challenging gold before we know it. We're going to challenge gold's market cap. So does Bitcoin have a 10x in it? I want your viewers to hear me that I'm extremely bullish. Bitcoin is going to 10x from here. We're a $2 trillion asset. If that much capital is flowing into Bitcoin, we're going to be a $20 trillion asset within a decade. Is Bitcoin going to be $1 million per coin someday? Yes, it is. And I think your viewers can do the math on what that looks like if we look 20 years out and we see Bitcoin not just take money from money markets, but it steals more money from the equity markets, the bond markets, right? I don't know. I'm bullish, Eve.
Yeah, no, me too. And you got me fired up with your math, because suddenly you start doing you start putting the numbers together, and the numbers are mind-blowing. It just gets really wild very, very quickly, and we're basically scraping the surface, because what you mentioned is just a small part of it at the end of the day, right? Once you start looking at especially Jesse Meyer's nice chart where he puts all the value of all the assets in the world, and what you see what Strategy is basically pumping into Bitcoin, right, through their instruments, you realize very quickly that these instruments are going to disrupt the entire markets, not just credit, not just money market, but again, real estate and art and all of this, because suddenly everybody's going to be looking into these instruments. So yeah, absolutely, and the math gets really crazy very quick.
It does. To just get you more bullish, think about how much money is going to be transferred and inherited by Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z over the next 20 years, Eve, right? The boomers own the world right now. They have so much capital, but they are going to die, and their kids are going to inherit that money. And I mean, who gets Bitcoin more than boomers? It's Gen X, it's Gen Y, it's Gen Z. Like, I think Gen Z might have a little ways to go on the education piece. I look at myself. I didn't understand Bitcoin earlier in my career. It took a little bit more time. It took a little bit more growth in my personal balance sheet for me to wrap my mind around Bitcoin. Maybe I had more time to like look at that and understand how Bitcoin helped me and helped my family and my personal balance sheet. So yeah, I'm super bullish. I'm super excited. I love that we've got people like you out here spreading the good word. I love that we've got people in charge of these companies like Michael Saylor, like Jack Mallers, like Matt Cole, like Jesse Myers, like you said, and Andrew over at SWC. Shout out to Jesse Myers, like his chart. Like that's the tool that I use to really orange pill my finance bro friends. Is I take a look at that and I say, I go through those numbers that we talked about, and it's like, how much money do you think is going to come from base dollars and money markets and bonds and equities into Bitcoin? And we see where that price can go. The Bitcoin price is going so much higher. These Bitcoin Treasury companies are going to go so much higher.
Yeah, as you mentioned, shout out to Jesse Myers, because that's also the chart that I have. I have it in a picture on my phone. I have it bookmarked everywhere because I know it's going to pop up in a discussion. Then I need to explain these things. And that's the one that helps to really visualize what's happening, right? This chart is probably the most magical one right now, especially talking about Bitcoin Treasuries. And man, there's so many other topics that we could discuss. I see we've been going on for quite a while now. I think it's a great way to end it here with your amazing math here. And so just before we wrap up, let the audience know where they can find your work.
Yeah, so you can find me on X, on Twitter, at Tyler Compiler. And that's where I'm talking about Bitcoin Treasuries. Like you mentioned earlier, I've got a podcast, Eve, that's at youtube.com/at Treasury Orange. And we're trying to do deep dives over there at Treasury Orange to just, again, educate our viewers on each of these Bitcoin Treasury companies, these Bitcoin products. And we've been slowly working our way through that. We've been talking to lots of amazing people. And I think there's a lot of alpha to be gleaned from our guests over there. I thank you so much for having me on, Eve. It's been great to talk with you, and we'll have to do this often.
Yeah, I was going to say we have to do this soon again, because I still have a list of questions and things I wanted to ask you. But yeah, there was so much news and so much going on that, yeah, we covered quite a bit, but not enough yet. So yeah, thank you so much for the time.
Yeah, there's never enough time to talk about all the news in Bitcoin and Bitcoin Treasury space, Eve. Thanks again.
So yeah, no, thank you. See you soon.
See you.
Are you all in on the chair? How many chairs are you sitting on right now?